So, I recently saw Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, the sequel to the 2018 hit Black Panther. Ryan Coogler's second swing at the MCU and one of the most ambitious undertakings of Phase 4, effectively closing it out. Phase 4 has been such a weird, contentious run of the MCU, partially because of its excess of content and the varying quality of said content. With 7 films and 8 television series released over the course of 2 years, compared to Phase 1's 6 films and 0 television series over the course of 4 years, if you felt like Endgame was your own personal series finale to the MCU like I did, you might find yourself a bit overwhelmed here. God knows I left Thor: Love and Thunder needing a long, hard break from the MCU, or maybe a break up. But little did I know that Coogler was gonna send this phase off with a bang. Now, Wakanda Forever is not a perfect film. It drags in places, has an entirely superfluous subplot with Martin Freeman's character Everett Ross, which is just meant to shoehorn in more of Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. It has a tendency to overstate its plot points, some of its character inclusions feel a bit studio mandated, its action can be hit or miss, and the audio mixing often drowns out a lot of the characters' dialogue. But all that aside, Wakanda Forever is a strikingly emotional film, pulling most of the original side characters to the forefront and giving us so much time to absorb and understand their sadness over the loss of Chadwick Boseman. I should say T'Challa, but let's be clear. The film starts with a silent version of the MCU logo sequence dedicated entirely to Chadwick Boseman. While the film certainly works in its own right, it's unmistakable that this is the entire cast and crew taking 160 minutes to say goodbye to Chadwick Boseman via his iconic role as Black Panther, a role that meant so much to so many people, not the least of which the Black community, who I will not speak for. This is a film about grief, about loss, about family, about inherited responsibility without ever saying it outright and dragging you out of the moment. You can see Shuri's grief manifest in the anger that boils just beneath the surface and her inability to let go. You can see Okoye's grief manifest in her tireless dedication to the royal family and thus her country. You see Ramonda's grief manifest in Angela Bassett outacting literally everyone in the film. Seriously, you guys, she could have been reading the script to Blade 3 and I'd have been captivated. I cannot overstate the weight of her performance. But everyone here is giving it their all. Speaking of the script, one of my favorite aspects of the screenplay is the lack of forced comedy. While there are certainly quips here and there, it always feels like naturally occurring banter between family and friends, and not cynical self-awareness, lazy over-reliance on the actors improving, or tone-breaking slapstick in the service of an insecure fear of coming off as too sincere. Most of what's here is earnest and heartfelt, and it's all supported by stellar cinematography. This is the most filmic I've seen the MCU in years, emphasizing the gravity and beauty of almost every moment. The framing, focus, transitions, composition, it's just a visual treat, with the exception of some of the CG. While Wakanda and Talokan are gorgeous locations and the camera work is top-notch, there were times where I was taken out of the moment by the CGI in this film, especially with Shuri as the Black Panther. Her movements often look stiff and uncanny. It's nothing quite as abrasive as some of the first film CGI, which is notorious nowadays. However, I want to emphasize that this is first and foremost a problem with Disney's totally fucked production pipeline. It's gotten so bad, the entire industry is sick of their shit. And while I do genuinely appreciate the film committing so much time to Shuri's struggle to reconcile with the death of her family and the weight of her nation on her shoulders, her actual transition to Black Panther is a bit underwhelming. However, her scene in the ancestral plane is a remarkable choice that truly elevates all the characters involved. Of course, the elephant in the room for comic book fans will obviously be Riri Williams, a character whose comic run has seen its own fair share of criticism. Some of it valid, and some of it frankly not. I highly suggest checking out Comic Drake's video on her, it's incredibly informative. Here, she's mostly relegated to being a side character to help progress the plot. She reminds me a bit of America Chavez from Multiverse of Madness in that she serves a function first and foremost. I wonder how much her presence was mandated by the studio, much like with America Chavez, rather than being incorporated naturally by the writers. Luckily, unlike America and Mom, the plot doesn't spend too much time trying to promote this as Riri's story. This film serves as an introduction to the character, who I suspect we'll see more of in the future. And lastly, our villain of the piece, Namor works amazingly well. For all intents and purposes, this guy could have been incredibly silly, but Tenoch Huerta is fully embracing the mantle of a king whose first priority is his people, and who has, much like the Wakandans, seen the pervasive cruelty of colonization firsthand. The Talokan and Wakandans have much in common, and in some ways, Namor gives us an alternate look at a T'Challa who instead chose isolation and fear. He serves as both a conflict for Wakanda and a catalyst for Shuri to grow and overcome her grief. Also, they use the word mutant for the first time in the MCU. Not really incredibly relevant, but neat. And without spoiling the ending too much, the note this film goes out on legitimately made me cry. And I was far from alone, half the theater was sniffling. I was expecting an emotional send-off, but hats off to Coogler. He chose something reserved, personal, intimate, and truly effective. I've been highly critical of the MCU after Endgame. Even some of the films I mostly enjoyed in this phase, I've returned to later with much less flattering opinions. But here, I felt something unapologetically sincere and personal, with so much care and passion that I couldn't help but be moved. Moved in ways I thought the MCU couldn't do for me anymore. I do not need every MCU film to be this emotionally gripping, nor would I want them to be. I am more than excited for Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and as someone who thought She-Hulk was a genuinely fun, if flawed, watch, I know that what I'm truly looking for is sincerity, commitment, and passion. Also, Denai Guerrera in more snappy outfits, and Winston Duke in anything.